My name is Caroline, and this is my story of how my entitled sister-in-law tried to steal my business empire, called me just a housewife, and learned the hard way that underestimating me was the biggest mistake of her life. If you've ever been dismissed by someone who thought they were better than you, only to watch them crumble when you showed your true power, smash that subscribe button. Like this video if you're ready for a story where the underdog doesn't just win, they obliterate their opponent so thoroughly that it becomes legendary. Let's dive into a tale of perfect revenge that's been 5 years in the making. Picture this. You're a successful entrepreneur who built a thriving business from your kitchen table, but your husband's family sees you as nothing more than a pretty face who got lucky. That was my reality until 18 months ago, when my sister-in-law Jessica made the fatal mistake of trying to destroy everything I'd worked for. Let me give you the full background because this story is so much deeper than just family drama. 5 years ago, I was exactly what Jessica always called me behind my back, a housewife. My husband Mark and I had just gotten married, and I was taking some time to figure out my next career move after leaving my corporate marketing job. But here's what Jessica never knew. I wasn't just sitting around eating bonbons. I was quietly building what would become a $1 million empire. It started with bath bombs. I know, it sounds ridiculous now, but I'd always been crafty, and I started making natural bath products for myself and my friends. The ingredients were simple: baking soda, citric acid, essential oils, and natural colorants. But the magic was in the combinations and the presentation. My friends couldn't get enough of them. They started asking me to make them for gifts, for their own use, for their kids. Within 2 months, I had a waiting list of 50 people. That's when I knew I had something special. I registered my business, Serenity Suds, as an LLC. I created a simple website, set up social media accounts, and started selling online. Mark was incredibly supportive, helping me photograph products and manage orders in the evenings after his accounting job. But I kept it quiet from his family. Mark's parents were lovely, but his sister Jessica, she was a different story entirely. Jessica was a pharmaceutical sales rep who made decent money but acted like she was running Fortune 500 companies. She had this condescending way of speaking to me, always asking about my little hobbies and when I was going to get a real job. She'd make comments like, "It must be nice to have a husband who can support your lifestyle," with this sickly sweet smile that made my blood boil. The worst part was how she'd talk about me to other family members. I'd overhear her at family gatherings. "Caroline's sweet, but she doesn't really understand business. She's never had to work for anything." The implication was always that I was some kind of gold digger who'd married Mark for security. So I kept my business growth quiet. While Jessica was bragging about her quarterly sales numbers, I was quietly scaling my operation. I moved from my kitchen to a small rented space. I hired my first employee, my neighbor Sarah, who became my production manager. I expanded my product line to include body scrubs, lotions, and specialty gift sets. By year 2, Serenity Suds was generating 6 figures in revenue. I was shipping products nationwide, had contracts with 3 boutique hotel chains, and was being courted by a major retail chain for shelf space. But at family dinners, I was still just Caroline the housewife who made cute little bath things. The turning point came at Mark's birthday party last year. Jessica had been drinking and was holding court with some of Mark's cousins, telling them about her latest promotion and her new company car. Then she looked over at me and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "It's so nice that Caroline has her little craft project to keep her busy. I mean, someone has to have a hobby, right? Not everyone can handle the pressure of real business." I felt my face flush, but I kept my smile plastered on. Mark squeezed my hand under the table. He could see I was about to lose it. But I didn't respond. I just filed that moment away for later. That night, I made a decision. I was done hiding my success. But I wasn't going to just announce it. I was going to make it impossible for Jessica to ignore. I started by subtly increasing my visibility. I accepted an interview with a local business magazine about women entrepreneurs. I joined the Chamber of Commerce and started attending networking events. I began posting more regularly on my business social media accounts, sharing behind-the-scenes content and customer testimonials. But I also started planning something bigger. Something that would not only showcase my success but put Jessica in a position where she'd have to confront her own assumptions about me. The opportunity came when Jessica mentioned she was struggling with her sales numbers and was looking for new business opportunities. She'd been talking about wanting to start a side business for months, always asking Mark about good investment opportunities and whether he knew anyone who might want to partner with her. That's when I had the most deliciously evil idea. What if I offered Jessica the opportunity to partner with me? Not as an equal, of course, as a sales representative for Serenity Suds. I could position it as me helping her out while secretly setting up the perfect stage for her to discover exactly how wrong she'd been about me. The plan was beautiful in its simplicity. I would offer her a commission-based sales position, let her think she was doing me a favor by bringing her business expertise to my little hobby, and then slowly reveal the true scope of my operation. But that wasn't the revenge. That was just the setup. The real revenge would come when Jessica realized that not only had she been completely wrong about me, but she'd also put herself in a position where she was working for the woman she'd spent years looking down on. And the most beautiful part, she was going to beg me for the opportunity. The next family gathering was Thanksgiving, and I came prepared with my Oscar-worthy performance. I'd spent weeks perfecting the art of appearing vulnerable while actually being in complete control. "Jessica," I said, approaching her while she was helping with dishes, "I've been thinking about what you said at Mark's party, about real business and pressure. You're so successful with your sales career, and I'm wondering if maybe you could help me with something." I watched her face light up. This was exactly what she'd been waiting for, confirmation that I needed her expertise. "Of course, Caroline. I'd be happy to help. What's going on with your little bath bomb thing?" The way she said "little bath bomb thing" with that patronizing smile made my resolve even stronger. But I kept my expression earnest and slightly worried. "Well, it's growing faster than I expected, and I'm honestly getting overwhelmed. I've been thinking about bringing on someone with real sales experience to help me expand. Someone who understands business strategy and client relationships." Jessica practically purred with satisfaction. "You know, Caroline, I've been looking for a side project. Something where I could mentor someone newer to business while building some additional income. Tell me more about what you're thinking." I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. Mentor someone newer to business? If she only knew. I was thinking maybe a partnership arrangement. You could handle the business development side while I focus on production. I mean, I know my products are good, but I don't really understand the corporate world like you do. Over the next hour, I painted a picture of a small but promising business that needed Jessica's expertise to reach the next level. I mentioned having a few local clients and being pretty busy for a home business. I showed her my phone with a couple of customer messages, carefully selected to look like a modest operation. Jessica ate it up. She started talking about her vision for expanding my brand, how she could leverage her pharmaceutical sales contacts, and how she could teach me about real business metrics. "I think this could be really good for both of us," she said, her voice taking on that condescending tone I knew so well. "I can help you turn your hobby into something more professional, more legitimate." By the end of the evening, we'd agreed that Jessica would come to my workspace the following week to see the operation and discuss terms. I could barely contain my excitement as I watched her mentally preparing to swoop in and save my failing little craft business. The week leading up to her visit was crucial. I had to set the stage perfectly. I decided to meet her at my original small workspace, the 800 square foot facility I'd rented 2 years ago but kept for smaller batch production and inventory overflow. It looked exactly like what you'd expect from a hobby business trying to grow. I made sure the space looked busy but not too successful. I had Sarah working on a batch of bath bombs, with ingredients and packaging scattered around to look appropriately homemade but trying to be professional. I kept the fancy equipment in the back room, out of sight. When Jessica arrived, she was dressed in her power suit and carrying a leather portfolio. She looked around the space with barely concealed amusement. "This is so cute, Caroline. Very authentic. Very small business starter kit." She pulled out a notebook and started jotting down observations. "I can already see several areas where we can improve efficiency and presentation." I played my role perfectly, nodding eagerly and asking for her advice on everything from product placement to professional packaging ideas. "The thing is," Jessica said, settling into full consultant mode. You're thinking too small. You're stuck in the crafty, homemade mindset. To really succeed in business, you need to think bigger. Scale. Professional partnerships. Real marketing strategies. She spent an hour walking around my small space, taking notes and making suggestions about everything from my amateur labeling to my inefficient production process. Every comment was delivered with that same condescending tone, as if she was speaking to a child who'd built a lemonade stand. I think we can really make something of this, she concluded, flipping through her notes. With my business background and connections, we could probably triple your revenue within 6 months. Maybe even get you into some real retail spaces. That's when I made my move. Actually, Jessica, before we talk about partnership terms, I should probably show you something. I want to be completely transparent about the scope of what you'd be taking on. I pulled out my laptop and opened my business dashboard. The real one. The one showing my actual revenue, my actual client list, my actual growth projections. These are my current numbers, I said, turning the screen toward her. I watched her face as she processed what she was seeing. Her eyes widened as she scrolled through the data. Current year revenue, $1.2 million. Client list, 847 active accounts, including those boutique hotel chains and the major retail chain that had just signed a 6-figure contract. I don't understand, she stammered, looking back and forth between the screen and my modest workspace. This is just one of my production facilities, I explained calmly. I have 2 others. The main facility is about 15 minutes from here. That's where we handle the bulk manufacturing and shipping. This space is mostly for specialty orders and product development. Jessica's mouth opened and closed like a fish. I could see her brain trying to recalibrate everything she thought she knew about my business. You mean you're already? She started. Making 7 figures annually? Yes. Have been for about 18 months now. I closed the laptop and smiled at her. But I'm always looking for good sales talent. The commission structure is quite competitive. The word commission hit her like a slap. She'd come here thinking she was going to be my business partner, my mentor, my savior. Instead, she was being offered a job. Working for me. I think there's been a misunderstanding, she said, her voice tight. I was thinking more along the lines of a partnership. An equity stake. Oh, I don't take on partners, I replied sweetly. But I do have several sales representatives who do very well on commission. Some of them make more than their day jobs. The silence that followed was absolutely delicious. I could practically see the gears turning in Jessica's head as she tried to process this new reality. The woman she dismissed as just a housewife with a hobby was offering her a job. I need to think about this, she said finally, her voice strained. She was gathering her things with shaky hands, clearly desperate to escape and regroup. Of course. Take all the time you need. Here's my business card, I said, handing her my professional card with my CEO title clearly printed. My assistant can schedule a follow-up meeting if you're interested. The word assistant was another perfectly placed dagger. Jessica took the card like it might bite her, and I watched her eyes focus on the title. Caroline Mitchell, CEO and founder, Serenity Suds Corporation. Corporation. Not LLC. Not small business. Corporation. After she left, I called Mark to fill him in on what had happened. He was quiet for a long moment before bursting into laughter. She actually thought she was going to mentor you. Oh my God, Caroline, this is perfect. What's your next move? Patience, I said. She's going to go home and do research. She's going to discover just how wrong she's been about everything. And then she's going to have to decide whether her pride is worth more than a really good opportunity. I was right. Over the next few days, Jessica clearly did her homework. She must have looked up my company online, read the articles about my success, maybe even called some of her contacts to ask if they'd heard of Serenity Suds. The evidence was everywhere once you knew to look for it. My LinkedIn profile showed my real position and accomplishments. My company website featured testimonials from major clients. There were industry articles about my innovative product lines and sustainable business practices. She must have felt like such a fool. The call came 3 days later. Jessica's voice was different, smaller, more uncertain than I'd ever heard it. Caroline, I've been thinking about our conversation. I wonder if we could meet again. I'd like to learn more about the opportunity. The way she said opportunity told me everything I needed to know. She was interested, but her pride was still struggling with the reality of the situation. Of course. Why don't you come by my main facility this time? I think you'll get a better sense of the full scope of what we're doing. This time, I wasn't holding back. My main facility was a 12,000 square foot warehouse and production center that I'd moved into 8 months earlier. It was impressive. Modern equipment, efficient production lines, a team of 15 employees, and enough inventory to stock a small department store. When Jessica walked in, I watched her face go through a series of emotions. Shock, embarrassment, and what looked like a hint of fear. Caroline, this is incredible. How did you? When did all this happen? It's been a gradual build over the past 5 years, I said, leading her through the facility. Started in my kitchen, moved to a small rented space, then here. We're actually looking at expanding to a second location next year. I introduced her to my team, my production manager Sarah, my head of marketing Jennifer, my operations coordinator David. Each introduction was another reminder that this wasn't some cute craft project. This was a real business with real employees and real impact. But the real knockout punch came when we reached my office. I had awards on the wall: Entrepreneur of the Year from the local Chamber of Commerce, Rising Star from the State Small Business Association, Innovation in Natural Products from an industry trade group. I had no idea, Jessica whispered, staring at the awards. I knew you were doing well, but this is a real business. I finished for her, smiling. Yes, it is. That's when she broke. Not crying, but I could see the exact moment when her entire worldview shifted. When she realized that every condescending comment, every dismissive joke, every time she positioned herself as the successful one in the family, all of it had been based on a complete misunderstanding of reality. Caroline, I owe you an apology, she said quietly. I've said things. I didn't understand what you were building here. Jessica, you don't need to apologize for being surprised by my success. But I do want to be clear about something. This opportunity I'm offering you isn't charity. It's not me throwing you a bone because we're family. It's a legitimate business opportunity because I think you could be good at it. I pulled out a folder I'd prepared, a detailed commission structure, sales territory maps, product training materials, and projected earnings for successful sales representatives. My top sales rep made $73,000 last year on commission alone. She started with us 2 years ago with no experience selling bath products. But she understood the market, she was willing to learn, and she worked consistently. Jessica studied the materials, and I could see her doing the math. Her pharmaceutical sales job paid well, but not $73,000 plus her salary well. What would be expected of me? She asked. Product knowledge training, obviously. Building relationships with potential retail partners in your territory. Some trade show attendance. Monthly sales targets that are aggressive but achievable. The usual sales metrics. I paused, then delivered the line I'd been planning for weeks. The question isn't whether you can do it, Jessica. You're obviously skilled in sales. The question is whether you can handle working for someone you used to call just a housewife. The directness of it made her flinch, but I needed her to confront what this really meant. She wasn't just taking a job. She was acknowledging that she'd been wrong about me in the most fundamental way possible. I deserve that, she said finally. And honestly, I think I need to prove to myself that I can do this. That I can see people more clearly than I have been. So you're interested? I'm interested. But I want to do this right. I want to earn whatever success I have with your company. I don't want any special treatment because I'm family. I smiled. That was exactly what I'd hoped she'd say. Good. Because you won't get any. Jessica started working for me the following month, and watching her navigate this new reality was more satisfying than I could have ever imagined. The woman who used to lecture me about real business was now sitting in my conference room, taking notes as I explained product specifications and market positioning strategies. Her first week was product training, and I made sure she understood every aspect of what she'd be selling. We spent hours going through ingredient lists, manufacturing processes, and quality control standards. I watched her struggle with the realization that my little craft project involved more technical knowledge than her pharmaceutical sales job. I had no idea there was so much chemistry involved, she admitted during one training session, looking overwhelmed by the documentation I'd prepared. Most people don't, I replied smoothly. That's why I have a degree in chemical engineering. It helps with product development and quality consistency. Another bomb dropped. Jessica had assumed I was just some arts and crafts enthusiast who got lucky. The idea that I had technical expertise beyond her own had never occurred to her. But the real beauty of my revenge wasn't in the big revelations. It was in the daily humiliations that came with Jessica having to rebuild her entire understanding of who I was. Like when she tried to give me advice about inventory management, and I had to explain that I'd already implemented the system she was suggesting 2 years ago. Or when she suggested I should consider online marketing, and I showed her my 6-figure digital marketing budget and the agency I'd hired to manage it. Every time she opened her mouth to share her business wisdom, she stepped on another landmine that revealed how little she actually understood about what I'd built. The most delicious moment came during her second week, when she attended her first sales meeting. I was presenting quarterly results to my sales team, showing growth charts and territory performance metrics. Jessica sat in the back, frantically taking notes as I discussed market expansion strategies and competitive analysis. After the meeting, she approached me with a confused expression. "Caroline, I don't understand. You're talking about market share and competitive positioning like you went to business school." "I did go to business school," I said casually. "MBA from Northwestern. Graduated 2 years before I started Serenity Suds." The look on her face was priceless. All those years of treating me like I was some kind of naive housewife who didn't understand the real world. And it turned out I had better business credentials than she did. But I wasn't done yet. The next phase of my revenge involved putting Jessica in situations where she had to publicly acknowledge my expertise and authority. Her first major test came when I assigned her to a trade show in Chicago. She'd be representing Serenity Suds at a major industry conference, which meant she'd have to present my products to potential buyers and distributors. "I want you to remember something," I told her during our preparation meeting. "You're not just representing the products. You're representing me. My reputation, my company's reputation, everything I've built over the past 5 years." The weight of that responsibility was clearly overwhelming for her. She spent weeks preparing, studying product information, practicing her presentation, and researching potential clients. The night before the trade show, she called me in a panic. "Caroline, I don't think I'm ready for this. These are major buyers, and they're going to ask technical questions. And what if I mess up and damage your relationships?" "Jessica," I said calmly, "you're going to be fine. You know the products, you understand the market, and you're a skilled saleswoman. Trust yourself." But what I didn't tell her was that I'd already contacted several of the major buyers who would be at the show. I'd set up informal meetings with them, ostensibly to introduce my new sales representative, but really to put Jessica in the position of having to explain to industry professionals how she'd come to work for the company she'd previously dismissed. The trade show was a revelation. I watched from across the convention floor as Jessica interacted with buyers who clearly already knew about Serenity Suds and respected our brand. She had to field questions about our growth trajectory, our production capabilities, and our expansion plans, all while knowing that every answer she gave was a testament to the business acumen of the woman she'd once called just a housewife. But the real moment of truth came when she encountered Marcus Rodriguez, the purchasing manager for a high-end hotel chain that had been one of my first major clients. "Oh, you're working for Caroline now," Marcus said when Jessica introduced herself. "That woman is brilliant. She completely revolutionized our guest amenity program. We've been working with her for 3 years, and she's never missed a deadline, never compromised on quality. You're lucky to work for someone with her vision." I watched Jessica's face as she processed this. Here was a respected industry professional singing my praises, treating me like the successful CEO I was, while she stood there as my employee. "Yes," Jessica managed to say, "Caroline is, She's incredibly talented. I'm learning so much from her. That evening, Jessica called me to report on the day's results. She'd secured 3 new accounts and several promising leads. But more importantly, she'd been forced to confront the reality of my reputation in the industry. "Caroline, I need to say something," she began, her voice shaky. "Today, talking to all these people, hearing how they describe you and your company, I realized I don't just owe you an apology. I owe you respect. Real respect." "Jessica, you don't owe me anything except good work," I replied. "But I appreciate you saying that." "No, I do owe you more than that. I've spent years making you feel small, treating you like you didn't understand business, like you were less capable than me. And the truth is, you've been running circles around me this whole time." There it was. The acknowledgement I'd been waiting for. Not just that she'd been wrong about my business, but that she'd been wrong about me as a person. "I want to ask you something," she continued. "Why did you offer me this job? After everything I said, everything I did, why give me this opportunity?" I paused, considering my answer carefully. "Because, Jessica, I wanted you to learn the same lesson I learned when I started this business. Success isn't about who talks the loudest or who has the most impressive title. It's about who does the work, who serves their customers, and who builds something real. You needed to see that." 6 months later, Jessica had become one of my top sales representatives. But more importantly, she'd become someone I actually respected. The transformation wasn't just professional. It was personal and profound. The final piece of my revenge came at the annual family Christmas gathering. 4 years, this had been Jessica's stage, the place where she'd hold court about her success while subtly diminishing everyone else's achievements. But this year was different. I arrived fashionably late, as successful CEOs do, wearing the confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you've accomplished. Jessica was already there, and I noticed she was dressed more modestly than usual, less of the flashy look-at-me style she'd always favored. "Caroline," Mark's mother called out as I entered. "We've been hearing such wonderful things about your business. Jessica's been telling us all about working for you." I glanced at Jessica, curious about how she'd been describing our professional relationship to the family. She met my eyes and gave me a small, genuine smile. "Caroline's been an incredible mentor," Jessica said, and I could hear the sincerity in her voice. "I've learned more about business in the past 6 months than I learned in 5 years of pharmaceutical sales." The word mentor hit me in an unexpected way. 6 months ago, Jessica had positioned herself as my potential mentor. Now she was publicly acknowledging that the relationship had been completely reversed. But the real satisfaction came during dinner conversation. Mark's cousin Brian started asking about my business, and instead of deflecting or minimizing it like I might have done in the past, I answered confidently. "We're projecting 2 million in revenue next year," I said casually, cutting into my turkey. "The retail expansion is going better than expected, and we're launching a men's grooming line in the spring." The table went quiet. These were numbers that dwarfed anything anyone in Mark's family had ever achieved professionally. 2 million. Mark's father repeated, clearly struggling to process the figure. "Caroline's being modest," Jessica interjected. "She's also been featured in Forbes, and there's talk of a major acquisition offer from a national beauty brand." I nearly choked on my wine. The acquisition talks were confidential. I'd only mentioned them to Jessica because she needed to understand the potential trajectory of her territory. The fact that she'd brought it up, positioning it as a point of pride rather than something to gossip about, showed how much she'd truly changed. "You didn't have to mention that," I said quietly to her later, when we were alone in the kitchen. "Yes, I did," she replied firmly. "I spent years making you feel like you had to hide your success. I'm not going to let you do that anymore." That moment, when my former tormentor became my advocate, was more satisfying than any revenge I could have planned. But the ultimate validation came from an unexpected source. Mark's uncle Robert, who'd always been dismissive of women in business, approached me after dinner. "Caroline, I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "I've been watching Jessica work for you, and listening to how she talks about your business. I realize I never took you seriously before. I should have." "Robert, You don't need to apologize, I started, but he held up his hand. No, I do. I made the same mistake Jessica made. I saw a young woman who seemed to have it easy, and I assumed that meant she didn't have substance. I was wrong. As the evening wound down, Jessica and I found ourselves alone on the back porch, sharing a bottle of wine and looking out at the winter landscape. I have something to tell you, she said after a long, comfortable silence. I'm putting in my 2 weeks' notice at the pharmaceutical company. I want to work for Serenity Suds full-time. I turned to look at her, surprised. Jessica, that's a big decision. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything. Caroline, working for you hasn't just been a job. It's been like going back to school. You've taught me what real leadership looks like, what it means to build something meaningful instead of just chasing quarterly numbers. She paused, swirling the wine in her glass. I want to ask you something, though. Was any of this? Was hiring me part of some kind of plan? To prove a point? I considered lying, but our relationship had evolved beyond the need for deception. Initially, yes. I wanted you to see who I really was, and I wanted you to understand what you'd been dismissing all these years. But Jessica, that stopped being about revenge a long time ago. You've earned your place on my team. When? She asked. When did it stop being about revenge? The day you called me after the trade show. When you acknowledged not just that you'd been wrong about my business, but that you'd been wrong about me as a person. That's when you stopped being my sister-in-law who needed to be taught a lesson, and started being my colleague who deserved respect. Jessica was quiet for a long moment. Then she started laughing. You know what the craziest part is? I thought I was so much more successful than you. I was making decent money, had a company car, got recognition from my managers. But I was just a cog in someone else's machine. You built the machine. Jessica, success isn't about being better than other people. It's about being better than who you were yesterday. And you've done that. As I drove home that night, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. My revenge had been perfect, but not in the way I'd originally planned. I'd set out to humiliate Jessica, to force her to confront her own assumptions and prejudices. But in the process, I'd actually helped her become a better person. The sweetest revenge, I realized, wasn't destroying your enemy. It was transforming them into someone you could respect. 6 months later, Jessica was promoted to regional sales manager. She now oversees a team of 12 representatives and has helped Serenity Suds expand into 3 new markets. More importantly, she's become someone who lifts others up instead of tearing them down. The lesson here isn't just about standing up to people who underestimate you. It's about understanding that the most powerful revenge isn't destruction. It's transformation. When you force someone to confront their own prejudices and limitations, you give them the opportunity to become better than they were. And sometimes, the person who benefits most from your revenge isn't you. It's the person who wronged you in the first place. What's the most satisfying transformation you've ever witnessed? Share your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, smash that like button and subscribe for more tales of justice, growth, and the power of proving people wrong. Remember, success isn't about being better than others. It's about being better than who you were yesterday. My mother's voice still echoes in my mind. How can you be so cold? Little did she know, her manipulation was about to backfire spectacularly. What happened next didn't just save my anniversary. It transformed our entire family dynamic forever. If you've ever dealt with a manipulative family member who uses guilt as their weapon of choice, smash that subscribe button. Like this video if you're ready to witness how one dad turned emotional manipulation into the most satisfying lesson in boundaries. Let's dive into a story where justice isn't just served, it's perfectly orchestrated. Picture this. You're a young father, trying to balance work, marriage, and a toddler, when suddenly your divorced parents turn your sister's birthday into a battlefield. That was my reality 3 months ago, and I had no idea it would lead to the most liberating moment of my adult life. Let me paint you the full picture of what was really happening here. My parents had been divorced for 8 years, and in that time, my mother had perfected the art of emotional manipulation. Every family gathering became a chess match where she positioned herself as the victim and anyone who didn't play by her rules as the villain. The birthday situation started innocently enough. My sister, caught in the middle of our parents' ongoing Cold War, created 2 separate group chats. One with my mom, my brother, and me for a traditional lunch celebration. Another with my dad for a pool party. Smart move on her part. She was trying to keep the peace by giving each parent their own event. But here's where my mother's true colors began to show. In the group chat with Mom, when my brother and I didn't immediately respond with our availability, she wrote those passive-aggressive words that every adult child of a manipulative parent knows all too well. "We need to celebrate your sister." The subtext was clear. We weren't being good enough children. I felt that familiar knot in my stomach. The same feeling I'd had countless times throughout my childhood when nothing I did was ever quite enough for her approval. But this time was different. This time, I had my own family to protect. So I responded honestly. I told her I'd celebrate my sister by attending the pool party on Saturday instead. I thought I was being reasonable. After all, I was still celebrating my sister, just at a different event. The pool party made infinitely more sense for my 2-year-old son. Anyone who's tried to keep a toddler entertained in a restaurant for 2 hours knows exactly what I mean. But my mother didn't see reason. She saw betrayal. The explosion that followed was swift and brutal. My phone started buzzing with messages that grew increasingly venomous. "You chose your father over me. You don't care about family. How can you be so cold?" Each message was a precision strike designed to hit exactly where she knew it would hurt most. I tried to de-escalate. I even offered to do the lunch anyway, thinking maybe I could somehow make this work. But that's when she delivered the killing blow, the one that would ultimately seal her fate. "I'm no longer willing to watch your son during your anniversary trip." Let me explain why this was so devastating. My wife and I had been planning our anniversary getaway for months. 4 days away. Our first real vacation since our son was born. My mother had enthusiastically volunteered to watch him when I'd asked her weeks earlier. She'd seemed genuinely excited about the prospect of spending time with her grandson. But now, because I'd chosen a pool party over restaurant lunch, she was weaponizing my child against me. She was willing to sabotage my marriage, disappoint my son, and destroy carefully laid plans just to punish me for not bending to her will. That's when something clicked inside me. I realized I wasn't just dealing with a disappointed mother. I was dealing with someone who viewed my family as chess pieces in her emotional games. And I was done playing. The old me would have panicked, would have apologized profusely and rearranged everything to appease her. But the new me, the father, the husband, the man who'd learned what healthy boundaries looked like, had a different plan. I started by taking a step back and really analyzing the situation. This wasn't about a birthday party. This was about control. My mother had spent years training me to believe that her emotional reactions were my responsibility, that keeping her happy was more important than my own family's needs. But here's what she didn't understand. I'd been watching, learning, and documenting every manipulation for months. Every guilt trip, every emotional outburst, every time she'd used my son as leverage. I'd started keeping a journal after my therapist suggested it, and the patterns were undeniable. So I crafted my response very carefully. First, I addressed the immediate situation with surgical precision. I texted her back, "I understand you're disappointed about the lunch. I want to celebrate my sister, which is why I'm attending her pool party. As for watching my son, I respect your decision to withdraw your offer. I'll make other arrangements." Notice what I didn't do. I didn't apologize for making a reasonable parenting choice. I didn't beg. I didn't engage with her emotional manipulation. I simply acknowledged her feelings and moved on. But that was just the beginning. While she was probably expecting me to come crawling back, begging for forgiveness, I was busy implementing what I now call the independence protocol. I started making calls. My wife's sister was thrilled to watch our son for the weekend. In fact, she'd been hoping for an excuse to spend more time with him. But I didn't stop there. I realized this was the perfect opportunity to establish some long overdue boundaries. I drafted a message to my entire family. Siblings, both parents, everyone. It was respectful but firm. I want to address the recent situation regarding my sister's birthday celebration. As a father and husband, My first priority is making decisions that are best for my immediate family. I chose the pool party because it's more suitable for my 2-year-old son. This wasn't about choosing sides between parents. It was about practical parenting. Going forward, I won't be attending multiple events for the same celebration unless it genuinely works for my family's schedule. I love you all, but I need to set healthy boundaries to protect my family's well-being. The response was immediate and telling. My siblings were supportive. My dad simply said he understood. But my mother... Radio silence for 3 days. Then came the phone call. "How dare you embarrass me in front of the family," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "You made me look like the bad guy." And that's when I delivered the line that changed everything. "Mom, I didn't make you look like anything. Your actions spoke for themselves. You chose to weaponize my child against me because I made a parenting decision you didn't like. That's not my fault. That's your choice." The silence on the other end was deafening. For the first time in my adult life, I'd called out her behavior directly, without softening it or making excuses for her. But the real revenge, the perfect, poetic justice, was still to come. My sister's birthday arrived, and something beautiful happened. The pool party was absolutely perfect. My son had a blast, my wife was relaxed, and my sister was genuinely happy. My dad and I had meaningful conversations. The atmosphere was light, fun, and drama-free. Meanwhile, I learned later that my mother's lunch was tense and awkward. My brother attended out of obligation, but he was clearly uncomfortable. My sister felt guilty about the whole situation. It was everything my mother had tried to create. A celebration focused on her emotions rather than the actual birthday girl. But here's where the story gets really satisfying. My wife's sister did such an amazing job watching our son during our anniversary trip that she asked if she could be our regular babysitter. Suddenly, we had reliable childcare from someone who genuinely enjoyed spending time with our son, without any strings attached or emotional manipulation. 3 weeks after our anniversary, my mother called. Her tone was different, smaller, more uncertain. "I miss my grandson," she said quietly. "He misses you too," I replied. "You're welcome to see him anytime you'd like. Even after what happened." "Mom, you're always welcome in our lives. But the manipulation stops now. If you want to be part of our family, you need to respect our boundaries and our decisions as parents." There was a long pause. Then, "I think I need to work on some things." That conversation happened 6 months ago. Since then, my mother has been in therapy. She's still working on her issues, but she's made genuine progress. She apologizes when she crosses boundaries. She asks permission before making plans involving my son. Most importantly, she stopped using guilt as her primary communication tool. But the most satisfying part of this whole story? My sister's next birthday. My mother approached me weeks in advance and asked, "What would work best for your family?" No demands. No manipulation. Just a genuine desire to celebrate her daughter in a way that worked for everyone. We ended up having one combined celebration, a barbecue at my sister's house where everyone could attend comfortably. My son played in the backyard while the adults enjoyed good food and even better conversation. My mother brought a photo album she'd made of family memories, focusing on celebrating my sister rather than controlling the narrative. It was everything a family gathering should be: joyful, inclusive, and free from drama. The lesson here isn't just about standing up to manipulative parents. It's about recognizing that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's unhealthy behavior. By holding firm to my boundaries, I didn't just protect my family. I forced my mother to confront her own patterns and ultimately become a better person. For anyone dealing with similar family manipulation, here's what I learned. First, document the patterns. It's easy to gaslight yourself into thinking you're overreacting, but when you see the behavior written down, the patterns become undeniable. Second, prioritize your immediate family's well-being over extended family's comfort. Your spouse and children deserve to be protected from emotional manipulation, even when it comes from grandparents. Third, don't engage with guilt trips. Acknowledge the feelings, but don't let them dictate your decisions. And finally, sometimes the most powerful response to manipulation is simply not playing the game. The beautiful irony is that my mother got exactly what she always claimed to want, a closer relationship with her family. She just had to learn that respect, not manipulation, is the foundation of genuine connection. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting back at someone. It's helping them become better than they were. And sometimes, the most satisfying victory is watching someone who tried to control you finally learn to control themselves. What's the most manipulative behavior you've ever had to deal with in your family? Drop your stories in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story resonated with you, smash that like button and subscribe for more stories where justice isn't just served, it's perfectly seasoned. And remember, setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary. Until next time, stay strong, stay true to your values, and never let anyone use your love against you. My uncle's bony fingers grabbed my shirt, his face inches from mine. Final warning, he hissed. Don't raise your voice in my house. The irony was suffocating. This wasn't his house. This was my grandfather's house, the man who'd built everything with his bare hands while my uncle lived off scraps of inherited wealth. But standing there, feeling his grip on my shirt, I realized something profound. Sometimes the most satisfying revenge isn't throwing a punch. It's watching someone destroy themselves with their own greed. If you've ever felt the burning injustice of family betrayal, if you've watched good people get trampled by those who mistake kindness for weakness, then hit that subscribe button right now. This story isn't just about inheritance or money. It's about the moment when quiet strength becomes unstoppable force. Like this video, because what happened next changed everything. And I guarantee you'll learn something about handling toxic family dynamics that you can apply in your own life. Let's dive in. 3 years ago, my grandfather died. Not just died, he left this world after building an empire with nothing but calloused hands and an unbreakable will. You have to understand something about my grandfather. He wasn't born into wealth. He was a contractor who started with a rusty toolbox and a dream. Over decades, he built not just buildings, but a legacy. 2 houses in our town, another in a neighboring city, and a small apartment complex right next to his main residence. To outsiders, this might sound impressive. But here's what people don't understand about inherited wealth. It reveals who people really are. And what it revealed about my family was devastating. My grandfather had 6 children. 3 sons, 3 daughters. Each one dealt with differently in his will, and each one revealed their true character when the inheritance was read. The oldest son, let's call him Uncle Ahmed, got the big house. And I mean big. The kind of house that makes you feel small just walking through the front door. But getting that house wasn't enough for Ahmed. It was never enough. His wife, a woman whose bitterness seemed to poison everything she touched, immediately began eyeing the rest of the inheritance like a vulture circling wounded prey. The youngest son got to share the other big house with his brother's nephews. Sounds fair, right? Wrong. His wife was cut from the same toxic cloth as Ahmed's wife. These women didn't just want their share, they wanted control. They wanted power. They wanted to reduce the rest of the family to servants in their own inherited homes. Then there was my eldest aunt. She'd married well, a genuinely good man who'd built his own success. She had a decent home, raised respectful children who grew up to be successful adults with their own families. She was content. She was happy. She was everything the other family members weren't. But it was my middle uncle and my youngest aunt who broke my heart. They were living in my grandfather's main house, the heart of everything he'd built. My aunt had been given just one room that she was allowed to modify. The rest of the house, she was expected to maintain it, clean it, serve in it. She'd never married because she'd spent her entire adult life caring for my grandparents. While her siblings were building their own lives, she was changing bedpans, cooking meals, and holding hands during sleepless nights. And my mother, she got one of the 2 small apartments in the complex next door. Due to our country's property laws, you can only own 1 property per town, so my parents had to choose, live close to family or have a decent home elsewhere. They chose family. They chose love over comfort. Here's what destroyed me. When my grandparents were dying, guess who was there? My mother and my aunt. Not the sons with their big houses. Not the daughters-in-law with their grand plans. Just 2 women who understood that love isn't measured in square footage or property deeds. I remember the funerals. I was so devastated I couldn't even cry. But I watched relatives who hadn't visited in months suddenly weeping rivers of crocodile tears. The performance was nauseating. They were grieving their lost opportunity for more inheritance, not the man who'd given them everything. And then the real horror began. The wives, these toxic women who'd married into the family, took control of my grandfather's house while keeping my aunt as their unpaid servant. Think about that for a moment. A grown woman, who'd sacrificed her entire life caring for her parents, was now being treated like hired help by women who'd contributed nothing to the family except their own children's disrespect. My uncles would visit constantly, forcing my aunt to clean for them, cook for them, pay for their meals while their wives lived in paradise. They'd boss around both my aunt and my mother, treating them like servants in their own inherited home. And the inheritance money? Zero. My aunt and mother received absolutely nothing while watching these parasites feast on their father's legacy. I personally never cared about the small apartment. I was satisfied. I was an only child, and honestly, I had some of that typical only child sensitivity. I spent my days visiting my aunt, watching her maintain a dignity that her own family was trying to strip away. But then I learned something that changed everything. 2 days ago, I was talking to my mother from another room. My voice was raised simply because of the distance. Nothing disrespectful, nothing aggressive. Just a son talking to his mother in what I thought was our home. That's when my uncle walked in. Picture this man. Skinny, old, unhealthy, untrained, weak. He was half my size but somehow convinced of his own authority. He grabbed my shirt, actually put his hands on me, and said those words that would haunt him forever. Final warning. Don't raise your voice in my house. In that moment, I felt something I'd never experienced before. Pure, crystalline rage. Not just anger, rage. The kind that makes your vision narrow and your muscles tense. I wanted to punch him so hard that he'd remember my grandfather's name every time he looked in the mirror. But I didn't. You want to know why? Because I realized something profound in that moment. Sometimes the most devastating revenge isn't physical. Sometimes it's intellectual. Sometimes it's legal. Sometimes it's simply being better than the person trying to tear you down. Here's what my uncle didn't know. That apartment he was calling his house. It's legally registered in my mother's name. It's not part of the inheritance they're trying to divide. It's not something they can take. It's ours, completely and legally ours. But more importantly, I realized that my uncle's behavior wasn't strength, it was desperation. He was acting like a cornered animal because he knew, deep down, that his position was built on sand. His authority was borrowed. His wealth was inherited. His power was an illusion. So I made a decision that would change everything. I started documenting everything. Every disrespectful comment. Every demand for free labor. Every attempt to claim property that wasn't theirs. I began building a case not just for legal action, but for something more powerful. Complete exposure of their character. I researched our country's inheritance laws. I consulted with lawyers about elder abuse. I investigated property rights and discovered that much of what they were claiming was legally questionable at best. But the real breakthrough came when I started talking to other family members. The respectful ones, the ones who'd been disgusted by this behavior but hadn't known how to address it. I discovered I wasn't alone. My eldest aunt, the one with the good husband, had been quietly documenting the same abusive behavior. My aunt's friends in the neighborhood had been witnesses to the exploitation. The revenge wasn't going to be a punch. It was going to be justice. 3 months later, I walked into my grandfather's house for what I knew would be the last time as a silent observer. My uncle was there, along with his toxic wife and my other uncle. They were discussing their latest scheme to force my aunt out of her own room so they could rent it to strangers. I placed a folder on the kitchen table. Inside were legal documents, witness statements, and a formal complaint filed with local authorities about elder abuse and property fraud. "What's this?" my uncle asked, the same man who'd grabbed my shirt. "This," I said calmly, "is your final warning." The blood drained from his face as he read. The property they'd been claiming as their own? Legally questionable. The money they'd been withholding from my aunt? Legally required to be distributed. The abuse they'd been inflicting? Legally actionable. But the most beautiful part wasn't the legal consequences. It was watching his wife's face when she realized that their grand plan was crumbling. She'd spent 3 years treating my aunt like a servant, and now she was about to discover that servants have rights, and justice has a way of finding those who think they're above it. My aunt stood straighter that day than I'd seen her stand in years. Not because she was getting money, though she was. Not because she was getting respect, though she was. But because someone had finally stood up for her. Someone had finally said, "Enough." The uncles. They suddenly became very quiet, very respectful, very aware that their free meal ticket had just been cancelled. The lesson I learned isn't about revenge. It's about justice. There's a difference between wanting to hurt someone and wanting to protect someone. There's a difference between anger and righteousness. And there's a difference between family and people who happen to share your blood. If this story resonated with you, if you've dealt with toxic family dynamics or inherited injustice, I want to hear from you. Comment below with your own experiences or the lessons you've learned about standing up for what's right. Like this video if you believe that sometimes the quiet ones are the most dangerous when pushed too far. And subscribe, because justice stories like this remind us that good people don't always finish last. They just take their time to finish right. What's the most satisfying moment of justice you've ever witnessed? Let me know in the comments below.